In a storeroom of the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, sometime in the spring of 1902, a shapeless lump of corroded bronze and rotted wood sat under a thin film of dust. Nobody had bothered with it. Not yet. The thing looked like sea wreck. A fist of rock and rust, cracked and shrinking as it dried. Around it stood beautiful things: bronze limbs, marble faces, the treasures everyone wanted to see first. Then someone leaned in close. Inside a fresh crack in the stone, catching the light, was a curve of metal. Not decoration. Not a broken clasp. A row of fine, even teeth. A gear. A precision gear wheel, cut with a craftsman's patience, embedded in something hauled from the bottom of the sea. And every other object around it belonged to the ancient world, 2,000 years old. How could a machined wheel be sitting inside wreckage from the age of Rome and Greece? The dates would not line up. The craft was too fine, too modern. By every rule scholars trusted, this object should not exist. But before that lump ever reached a museum shelf, it lay in the dark under 45 meters of Aegean water, and the men who found it were not scholars. They were sponge divers, blown badly off course in the early months of 1900. They came from Symi, a small island of divers and traders, working the sponge beds far from home. Their captain was a man named Demetrios Kontos, weathered by years of hauling breath and men up from the deep. Rough weather forced them to shelter near the island of Antikythera, a bare speck of rock between Crete and the mainland. While they waited for the sea to calm, Kontos decided the crew might as well dive the seabed below. One of them, a diver named Elias Stadiatis, sank down in a heavy copper helmet and canvas suit, a lead-weighted line his only tether to the world above. Down he went, into water that swallowed the light. Minutes later, the line jerked. The crew hauled him up fast, and when they cracked the helmet, Stadiatis was pale and shaking. He gasped that the seabed was covered in the dead, corpses of horses, of men, rotting in the dark. The captain suspected the terror of the depths had played tricks on him. So Kontos went down himself, following the same line into the gloom to see what had frightened his diver so badly. What lay on the bottom was not the dead at all. It was bronze. An arm, green with corrosion, reaching up from the sand, the limb of a statue. And around it, half buried, the scattered cargo of a ship that had gone down 2,000 years before. That word from the seabed sent a message racing to Athens, and by the autumn of 1900, the Hellenic Royal Navy had joined a crew of sponge divers over the deep water off Point Glyphadia. 45 meters down, the pressure crushes the chest and steals the mind. The divers wore heavy canvas suits and bronze helmets, air pumped by hand from the deck above. Each descent was a gamble with the body itself. Down there in the gloom lay a Roman cargo ship, broken open across the slope of the reef. Its timbers had rotted to shadows. What remained was the cargo, scattered and half buried in the sand. And what a cargo it was! Bronze and marble statues loomed from the silt, some fused to the rock, some staring up with sightless eyes. The divers wrestled these giants toward the surface, one agonizing lift at a time. The hull grew stranger the longer they worked. Delicate glassware that had survived 2,000 years underwater. Gold jewelry, coins gone green with age. A treasure ship, it seemed, sailing somewhere it never reached. For months across 1900 and into 1901, they raised marble limbs, corroded bronze, pottery, and jewels from that dark shelf of rock. Every piece was crated and shipped to Athens. And buried among the treasures rode one shapeless lump nobody thought twice about. The statues arrived in Athens like war heroes. Bronze limbs, marble torsos, the youth's outstretched arm hauled dripping from the deep, and crowds gathered at the National Archaeological Museum to see what the sea had kept. Curators bent over the glamorous wreckage for months. The green-crusted bronzes needed cleaning. The marble needed matching, limb to limb, face to fractured face. Every hand in the building was busy resurrecting the beautiful things. And in the middle of that glory sat one shapeless thing nobody wanted. A lump of corroded bronze and rotted wood, no bigger than a thick book, the color of pond scum and dried mud. There was nothing to see. No face, no figure, no story a visitor could admire. So it was set aside on a shelf among the odds and ends while the real treasures took the light. For 2 years it simply waited, gathering dust while it quietly kept breaking apart. And in all that time, not one scholar in that famous building suspected that the ugliest object in the room was the only one that should not exist. That lump of corroded rock might have sat forgotten forever, if not for a spring afternoon in 1902, when 2 cousins wandered the museum floor among the freshly cleaned bronzes. One of them was the museum's own director. The date was the 17th of May. Valerios Stais, the archaeologist who ran the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, was examining the salvaged fragments beside his cousin, the Greek politician Spiridon Stais. The dull greenish crust had begun to split as it dried. And there, in the widening crack, something caught the light that had no business being in a 2,000-year-old rock. A curved rim. A row of fine teeth, cut clean and even, spaced with a precision that looked almost mechanical. A gear wheel, embedded in the stone, as if the rock itself had grown machinery. The cousins leaned closer. This was not decoration, not jewelry, not the arm of some fallen god. It was engineering. How could a toothed wheel end up inside wreckage hauled from the seabed alongside marble statues and clay jars? Valerios Stais turned it over in his mind and reached for the only answer that made sense to him. He believed he was holding some kind of astronomical clock, a device of gears and dials built by ancient hands to measure the heavens. It was a bold guess, and it would take the world of scholars a very long time to forgive him for it. An astronomical clock from a Roman wreck older than the birth of the calendar most of the world would later keep. When Valerios Stais said it aloud, the room went quiet, because if he was right, something was very wrong with the timeline. The problem was arithmetic. Everything else pulled from that seabed. The statues, the coins, the glass, sat comfortably in the ancient world. But finely cut interlocking gears? Nothing else like them survived from that era. Not for over 1,000 years. So most scholars did what scholars do with an object that breaks the rules. They decided it was in the wrong place. The word they reached for was prochronistic. Too advanced. Too complex. Simply impossible for the hands that supposedly made it. Think of what that meant. Rather than believe the ancient Greeks could build such a thing, learned men found it easier to assume the fragment had somehow slipped through time and landed in the wrong century. And so the questions faded. The lump went quiet again. Then a German philologist named Albert Rehm turned his attention to it. A man who read dead languages for a living, drawn to the faint markings on a corroded slab of metal. And where others saw an impossibility, he began to see a purpose. Rehm was the first to propose out loud what the machine truly was. Not a clock, a calculator of the heavens, an instrument built to reckon the movements of the sky. It was a stunning leap, and almost no one was ready to follow him. For half a century, the fragment sat behind museum glass, too strange to solve, too stubborn to throw away. Then, in 1951, a British science historian named Derek de Solla Price read about them and could not look away. Price was no ordinary collector of curiosities. A physicist turned historian, he later held a chair at Yale University, and he had a rare gift for reading old machines the way others read old manuscripts. Where earlier scholars saw an embarrassment, an object that seemed to break its own century, Price saw a puzzle worth a lifetime. He kept coming back to it, year after year, unable to let the corroded lump rest. But there was a wall he could not climb. The gears he wanted to understand were buried inside the metal, locked under centuries of mineral crust. He could sketch the surface all he liked. The heart of the thing stayed hidden. So Price asked a question no one before him had dared to answer. If he could not open the mechanism without destroying it, could he somehow see straight through the metal itself? It was a strange thought for a historian, to treat a 2,000-year-old relic like a patient on an operating table. But Price was certain the answer lived somewhere in the shadows between those gears. All he needed was the right kind of light. The corrosion that had guarded these fragments for 2,000 years would not yield to the eye or the hand. So Derek DeSala Price stopped trying to look at the bronze. He decided to look straight through it. To do that, he needed a very particular kind of collaborator. In 1971, Price partnered with Charalampos Karakalos, a Greek nuclear physicist, a man who spent his days working with radiation and knew how to make invisible things visible. Together they aimed X-rays and gamma rays at the encrusted lumps. The beams passed through the crust, but the denser metal beneath cast its own shadow onto the film. What emerged were ghost images of the machine's hidden interior. And there, buried inside the stone, were teeth. Row upon row of them. Gear wheels stacked and meshed with a precision that seemed to belong to another age entirely. Karakalos could now count what no human eye had seen in millennia. This was the breakthrough Price had chased for 20 years. The imaging let him and Karakalos count teeth on gears they could never physically touch, and begin mapping how the wheels turned against one another inside the crust. In 1974, Price published his findings. For the first time, the corroded lump had a diagram, a proposed architecture of gears drawn from shadows on film. The world finally had proof of what the machine contained. But how it all fit together? That was only beginning. Those X-ray plates revealed a world of gears trapped inside stone. But before we understand what they meant, we have to understand what the object physically was, because when it came up from the sea, it was barely an object at all. It arrived in Athens as a single lump of corroded bronze and wood. No visible gears, no case, no shape, just a rock, roughly the size of a large book, sitting in a tray of drying seawater. The bronze had transformed over 2 millennia into a mineral called atacamite, a fragile green crust. When the divers pulled it into the air, that crust began to crack and shrink, subtly warping the very dimensions of every piece inside. Over time, that one lump broke apart, first into 3 main fragments, the largest carrying the bulk of the machine. And conservators, working across decades, would eventually separate the wreck into 82 distinct pieces. Of those 82 fragments, only 4 held gears. The rest were splinters of the wooden case, shards of plate, or slivers of metal covered in faint inscriptions worn almost to nothing by the sea. The whole thing had once lived inside a wooden case, roughly 34 centimeters tall, 18 wide, and 9 deep. Small enough to hold in 2 hands. A box you could carry, packed with a mechanism no one thought the ancient world could build. And at its heart lay the largest gear, about 13 centimeters across, once cut with 223 individual teeth. 223. Filed by hand, in an age of bronze and firelight. How was such precision even possible? For a century, that fragile crust of atacamite had guarded its secret. No one could pry the gears apart without shattering them. So in 2005, a team decided not to open the fragments at all. They would look straight through them. The project was led by Mike Edmonds, an astrophysicist from Cardiff University in Wales. His idea was almost stubbornly simple. If the answers were locked inside solid metal, then bring in a machine powerful enough to see through the metal itself. So a heavy scanning rig was hauled into the museum in Athens. Computed X-ray tomography, the same technology that peers inside a living body, now aimed at a corpse of ancient bronze. Slice by slice, it would rebuild the interior in 3 dimensions. The images came back layered like the pages of a shut book finally fanned open. Teeth! Rings of teeth! Wheels nested inside wheels, hidden behind wheels. And then the counting began. By the time they finished, the scans suggested at least 37 meshing bronze gears packed into a case barely larger than a book. 37. In a device from the 2nd century before Christ. How was that even possible? But the gears were only half of what the machine surrendered. High-resolution scanning went after the faint markings that had once covered the outer casing, characters worn to nothing by 20 centuries of seawater and salt. And the scans pulled those ghost inscriptions back from the dead, faint lines no human eye had read since the age of Hipparchus. Tiny instructions, etched by hands long turned to dust. The question now was terrifyingly simple. What did they say? Those faint scans didn't just count gears. They revealed what those gears were built to do. And the answer reached far beyond the little bronze box, all the way up into the night sky over the ancient Greek world. Turn the little hand crank on the side, and the whole heavens moved. The sun crept along its path. The moon followed behind. Both traced their way through the 12 signs of the zodiac, exactly as a Greek stargazer would have watched them wander the real sky. Set the pointer to a date, and the machine told you where each body would sit against the stars. Not just for that day. For a day years away, one no living person had yet seen. A calculator made of hammered metal, doing the sky's arithmetic. But the most unsettling function was darker than the daily march of sun and moon. On a spiral dial, the mechanism predicted eclipses. When the moon would swallow the sun, when the Earth's shadow would swallow the moon, decades before it happened. Sit with what that meant to the people who owned it. In an age with no telescopes, no lenses, no printed tables, someone could turn a crank and say, "On such a night, the moon will go blood dark," and they would be right. The scans suggested the spiral dial even hinted at more than timing. Some markings pointed to the character of each eclipse, the color, the direction, perhaps even a warning of wind. The heavens weren't just modeled here. They were, in a sense, forecast. How could a hand-cranked box of bronze hold the movements of the sky decades deep? The gears were the answer. Ratio upon ratio, one wheel driving the next, until the count of teeth became the shape of the cosmos. And one of those wheels hid something stranger still. But of everything those gears were built to chase, the strangest quarry was the moon itself. Because the moon, as the ancient Greeks well knew, refuses to keep a steady pace across the sky. It hurries, and it lingers. When it swings closest to Earth, at perigee, it races. When it drifts farthest away, at apogee, it slows. To the naked eye, it seems constant. In truth, it never is. Here is what should stop you cold. The scans revealed that the mechanism modeled that uneven motion. Its makers knew the moon's speeds and slows, and they built bronze that behaved the same way. The trick lived in a pair of gears. One rode a pin set slightly off-center on another, so as they turned, the pin slid in a slot, speeding the pointer here, dragging it there. A mechanical stutter, engineered on purpose. Who could have understood the heavens that precisely more than 2,000 years ago? The prime suspect is Hipparchus of Rhodes, the astronomer who, in the 2nd century before Christ, studied this very anomaly of the moon's motion. Some researchers believe Hipparchus may have been consulted when the machine was built. His theory of the moon translated straight into meshing teeth. If that is true, then this device carries the fingerprints of one of history's greatest minds. But the heavens weren't the only thing this bronze brain kept time with. Turn one of its dials, and the pointer didn't chase the moon at all. It traced something far more human. Something happening down on Greek soil, every 4 years. Among the mechanism's inscriptions, researchers found the names of games. A dial that turned once every 4 years, ticking through a cycle of great athletic festivals, echoing the rhythm of the ancient Olympic Games themselves. Picture what that means. A machine built to predict eclipses decades away also told its owner when the runners would gather, when the crowds would pour into the stadiums, when the whole Greek world would pause for sport. Why carve festivals into an astronomical instrument? Because to the people who built it, the sky and the games were bound together. The same calendar that governed the stars governed the sacred truces, the processions, the crowning of victors. So this wasn't just a tool for astronomers. It served a culture, a device that could see the cosmos, and yet it stooped to remember the foot races of men. And even that, it turns out, was only part of what it tracked. But the makers of this machine weren't only counting seasons of festivals. Hidden in the bronze, waiting more than 2,000 years, were numbers no one had been able to read. And in 2016, a team finally read them. The inscriptions ran across the mechanism's surface like a manual, tiny letters barely a millimeter tall, scored into corroded metal. For decades they were unreadable. Then advanced imaging pulled them out of the crust, one faint stroke at a time. And the recovered figures pointed at the sky. According to the researchers, the numbers matched the synodic cycles of 2 wandering lights the Greeks had watched for centuries: Venus, the morning star, and distant, slow-moving Saturn. A synodic cycle is simply how long a planet takes to return to the same place in our sky. To carve those exact numbers into gearwork, the builders had to understand the heavens with a precision that feels centuries ahead of them. Which raises the obvious question. If Venus and Saturn were tracked, where were the others? Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, the full family of wandering lights the Greeks called the 5 classical planets. Why would the makers stop at 2? Most likely, some researchers argue, they didn't. There is speculation that a whole portion of the mechanism is gone, a lost front assembly that once modeled all 5 planets sweeping through the zodiac. If true, what survives is only a fraction of what was built. If parts of it are still missing, still hidden inside crusted bronze, then one question refuses to settle. When was this thing actually built? And the answer, it turns out, is a fight that has run for over a century. The wreck itself gives the firmest anchor. Multiple lines of evidence date the sinking of that Roman cargo ship to roughly 70 to 60 years before Christ. So whatever this machine was, it existed before the ship went down. But how long before? That is where the certainty ends. Scholars have placed its construction across a wide, restless span, variously dated to about 205 to somewhere between 150 and 100, or as late as 87 years before Christ. The clue that lets researchers argue at all is the machine's own calibration. Set the dials, and they point to a starting moment, a day the device was tuned to. And in 2022, one team pinned that moment to a single date. The 23rd of December, 178 years before Christ. A midwinter day, they proposed, from which the whole mechanism began counting the heavens. Not the day it was built, they stressed, but the day it was set to begin. Other experts weren't convinced. They favored a different starting point entirely, 204 years before Christ, decades earlier. 2 rival dates, drawn from the same silent gears. And more than 2,000 years on, no one can say for certain which moment the machine was truly born to keep. While scholars argued over centuries and calibration dates, one place kept its silence: the seabed itself, 45 meters down off Point Glyphadia. And more than 100 years after Kantos and his divers left it, teams came back to ask what else the reef was still holding. In 2012, then again in 2015, divers returned to the wreck site with modern gear the old spongemen could only have dreamed of. They mapped the slope. They lifted new pieces from the sand. And the reef gave up more than statues. There were fresh art objects, fragments of the same lost cargo that had lain scattered across the slope for 2,000 years. But the strangest suggestion from those returns wasn't a single object at all. It was the hint of a second ship. Researchers found signs that a second vessel may lie near the first, possibly connected to the same treasure-laden voyage. Two ships, one stretch of hostile reef. Had a small fleet gone down together, spilling its riches across the dark? Among the finds, one object made hearts race, a bronze disc embellished with the image of a bull, its rim pierced by 4 little ears, each with a hole. 4 holes. A round bronze plate. Could this be a lost cog, another wheel from the mechanism itself? For a moment it looked like the machine had surrendered one more secret, but the disc's teeth didn't match any gear. There seems to be little evidence it belonged to the device at all. More likely, experts say, it was simply bronze ornament from a piece of furniture aboard the ship. The divers keep returning to that seabed off Antikythera, hoping the water still hides answers. But the deepest mystery was never on the ocean floor. It was in the silence that followed the machine itself. Consider what these scans confirmed. 37 meshing bronze gears, cut and aligned by hand more than 2,000 years ago. Nothing of comparable complexity would be built again for over 1,000 years. Not in the great libraries of the Hellenistic world, not in Rome, not in Byzantium. The knowledge to build such a thing seems to simply vanish from the record for over 1,000 years. Not until the 14th century, in the towered cities of Western Europe, do gears of that intricacy turn again. Astronomical clocks. A whole lost art, somehow reinvented from nothing. And here is the question no expert has answered. How did this machine come to be aboard a Roman cargo ship at all? Who packed it? Where was it going? Nobody knows. A device decades ahead of everything around it, riding a doomed ship to a destination lost to the sea. We recovered the gears. We never recovered the story. And that is where it rests. If you have a theory about how it got aboard, tell me in the comments, along with the case you think we should uncover next. Subscribe and stay with the Unsolved.